2025, an autonomous system providing life support for the brain and allowing it interaction with the environment is created. The brain is transplanted into an Avatar B. With Avatar B, man receives new, expanded life. 2025. The new generation of avatars provides complete transmission of sensations from all 5 sensory robot organs to the operator. 2030 to 2035, Rebrain. The colossal project of brain reverse engineering is implemented. World science comes very close to understanding the principles of consciousness. 2035, the first successful attempt to transfer one's personality to an alternative carrier. The epoch of cybernetic immortality begins. 2040 to 2050. Bodies made of nanorobots that can take any shape arise alongside hologram bodies. 2045 to 2050. Drastic changes in social structure and in scientific and technological development. All the prerequisites for space expansion are established. For the man of the future, war and violence are unacceptable. The main priority of his development is spiritual self-improvement. A new era dawns. The era of neo-humanity.
That's how we can be so terrified by the bird flu among the humans. Why? You'll discover that these things are they're creating things we didn't expect. Scientists at the Salk Institute in San Diego recently engineered mice that possess a small percentage of human cells. I think I hired one of those once. No, I don't. So they injected embryonic human stem cells into the brains of rodent fetuses, resulting in birth of mice with both human and rodent brain cells. You know, you think you may have met some of them. I don't know the feeling. And one of the goals of this research is very noteworthy. They're trying to make realistic models of neurologic disorders that may prove useful in studying other diseases. They all have good goals. Irving Weissman of Stanford University and his team injected human neural stem cells into mouse fetuses, and that helped make the first mouse with a nearly complete human immune system. So these things are worthy of study. There's worthwhile potential benefit here. And so the percentage of brain cells in the existing mice is only about 1%, but he thinks that they can make them almost entirely equivalent human cells as they go forward. So now the problems in these areas, while there's noble goals, there are few safeguards against errors or even open abuse. And of course there are cross-species implications that there's no way to anticipate. And they actually have mice that they're growing human organs on in the hopes of actually putting them to practical use. And if that picture doesn't bother you, you haven't looked at it carefully enough. Okay. Unknown diseases or complications. Tampering with the human genome is part of the thing that's going on here. Well, there's also this whole area of robot weapons that you may be hearing a lot about. I wanted to get a couple of them that I thought were interesting because they're predicted in the Bible, whether you realize it or not. In Jeremiah 50, verse 9, there's a verse, and I'm not going to concern ourselves here with the context, but just one phrase that's in it. Jeremiah records, "For lo, I will raise and cause up to come up against Babylon an assembly of great nations from the north country, and they shall set themselves in array against her. And from thence shall she be taken." Get this. "Their arrows shall be as of a mighty expert man, and none shall return in vain." Now, in the English, you don't pick it up, but in the Hebrew, it's very emphatic. It actually, as of a mighty expert. The expertise is not in the shooter, it's in the arrow. Did you pick up on that? The verb is sakal in the Hebrew. It means to be prudent, circumspect, wisely understand, and prosper. That's a characteristic of the arrow, not the shooter. It's a fil participle masculine singular absolute. It means to have insight, to give attention to, consider, ponder, be prudent, to have in other words, the arrow has comprehension. Do you see what it's saying? Now, can you give me some examples of that? Yes, I can. And by the way, the ISV says the arrows shall be like a skilled warrior. They won't miss their targets. The NAS, the arrows will be like an expert word. So this is not a contrived translation. The intelligence is in the arrow, and they can't miss. In other words, these are smart weapons. They're mentioned in the Bible. Today we take them for granted, but I wanted to put a big biblical root to the word. The arrow is katus. It's anything shot from an engine of war, shot by in 1611 when the King James, that was obviously a bow and arrow. But the same word could be used for a missile or anything thrown as an arrow or a javelin. There's another thing. There's a rifle, by the way, that you may want to know about. The XM25. I don't know if that's familiar. It's kind of an interesting device. It's coming to a war near you. It has a system of range about 2,300 feet, and I believe they're using it in Afghanistan. But it has a gun sight that uses a laser that measures the distance, and it also sets a time on the bullet to explode, so you can shoot over the guys. If he's behind a barrier, you can shoot over the barrier and nail him. And so it's a bullet that has the effect of going around corners. It's a game changer. And there's machine emplacements, of course, and the thing that impedes robotics is skin. Well, one of the things they're trying to do is get direct limb-to-brain communication with these things. And robotic limbs have limited motions, and the user can't feel what he or she is touching. A new approach using optical fibers implanted around the nerves can transmit more data and let the prosthetics speak to the brain. Scientists have discovered that they can stimulate a neuron to send a message by shining infrared light on it. And so DARPA, the Advanced Research Projects Agency of the Department of Defense, is awarding contracts to explore these kinds of things further. The direct brain-to-computer interfacing, people are actually connecting these devices to their brain. And a monkey here is operating a robotic arm with direct brain-to-computer interfacing. And it's responding to his thought patterns. They can quickly learn to control voluntarily. They can control the firing rates of individual multiple neurons in the primary motor cortex if rewarded properly, and so on. And I won't get into those details. So the main point is the thing that's held robotics back is a replacement for skin. And they now have found a way to make synthetic skin that is so sensitive it can feel the footprint of a fly, which means the robot can be designed to tell what it's picking up. Is it a wine glass? Is it a bowling ball? Is it a piece of silk? It can tell. And so the synthetics, that's been a major breakthrough in the robotics area. The other field, I want to go through 4 fields. We've talked about genetics, we've talked about robotics briefly. There's a field called nanotechnology that I want you to be aware of. That involves the manufacture and manipulation of materials at the molecular level in the atom, the smallest things you can get. And here, to give you a feeling of a nanometer, it takes about 100,000 nanometers is a piece of paper. So nanometers are very, very small. So you're talking about molecular-sized machines. And they can develop drugs. And for example, it can go and find a place in your body and deliver a microdose, if you will, that would have an intensity 10,000 to 1 you could do any other way. So they have tremendous potential. And our skills at developing nanomaterials, of course, is going so fast that it's hard to even keep up with any one of these. But the big one, the 4th one of the ones I want to summarize here is artificial intelligence. And that's the blurring the distinctions between the man and the machine. And there are ways now that it's getting fuzzier and fuzzier as to which is which. The first step towards computer mind reading has come from using brain scans to identify thoughts, and they're doing this at Princeton University's Neuroscience Institute. And these brain scans there's patterns that they're starting to study. What's exciting about this, too, is it's non-invasive. They don't have to directly connect to the brain. They can read the brains through other devices I'll show you here in a minute. And the basic idea is to try to determine what's on the subject's mind and see what they can infer from the brain scans directly. And so they're looking at the pattern, studying that. And so there's a lot of optimism. We'll come back to that here, too. The Army's, though, has a mind control project where they're trying to develop thought helmets that would harness silent brain waves for secure communication among troops. And that's not, those are contracts that are being led. They hope it'll lead to direct mental control of military systems by thought alone. And they're a long way from getting there, but they're letting research contracts in that direction. And so a 5-year contract's been awarded to a coalition of scientists, both at University of California at Irvine, Carnegie Mellon, and University of Maryland, to try to decode the activity in those brain, so the soldier could radio commands to one or more comrades by thinking of the message he wants them to get. The most dangerous of all these things are the brain-to-computer interfaces, or BCIs they call them. And they're actually implanted inside the skull, but rest outside the brain rather than within the gray matter. And what most people that are in this field are, this thing is acting strange here. Let me kill that. Is that on there too? Yeah. When these professors connect themselves to computers or other devices, they are typically PhD, and PhDs are very, very trained in a specificity, a specific area. But there's something that goes along with a PhD, and that's pride. And one of the things that startles me is to realize that these people, and I've trafficked with many of them in government labs and elsewhere, have usually zero insight theologically. They have no grasp of the field of study called demonology, and in a field within which there are things called entries, ways that demons can gain access. And when you open up communication channels, those are two-way channels. So the kinds of things that are possible, I'm not saying they're prevalent at the moment, but are possible, are really quite disturbing. But anyway, the best resolution if you're going to do this kind of study is direct connection, and people are doing things like shift a little more to the computer side of it. IBM has unveiled experimental computer chips designed for a new generation of brain-inspired computers that learn from what's going on. And I'm talking about the hardware itself does. Cognitive computing aims to use information from many different inputs. So it's multiple input, and it's self-programming, if you will. And these chips would allow a sensor-studded glove to monitor sights, smells, textures, temperature of grocery products, whatever. There's all kinds of commercial potential here. But they'll also integrate messages in ways that may be far more intuitive than we normally think of in terms of software alone. And I won't get into the specifications, because any specification I put in a slide is out of date a week later, so we'll just keep moving here. But there is a comment here that needs to be made. There is a point. Ray Kurzweil, one of the gurus in this world, looks for a crossover. He gives it an unfortunate name. He borrows a term from mathematics called a singularity. He calls it the singularity. It's an unfortunate term because it's misleading. But what he means by that is there's a point at which the computers will exceed the capacity of the human brain. And that's only a few years away, not a few decades, a few years away. It's that close. And when that happens, that's a major, major milestone in the field of artificial intelligence, obviously. And we'll talk more about that. But the computers that learn, they're already taking these into applications of pattern recognition, navigation, other areas. And I don't want to get in the details of this one. There's a new partnership between IBM and 3M where they're looking towards a new breed of microprocessors where they stack 100 layers of chips atop one another to make it thinner. You make things thinner for lots of reasons. Speed is part of it. When you're operating at those speeds, even a few inches can be too big an encumbrance. And so they're trying to, 3M is trying to create an adhesive that will allow this to happen. It's also, there's a heat dissipation issue and the rest of it. But this is also expecting to give you 1,000 to 1 advantage.